Hello, volleyball enthusiasts. Welcome to another exciting episode of Master Coaches Wednesday Weekly Buzz. I'm Bob Bertucci, and I'm joined with fellow Master Coaches Mick Haley, Tom Hilbert, Jim Stone, and Bill Walton. We have a special treat for everyone today with our two guests that are on the show. Tom, would you like to go ahead and introduce our first guest?
You bet. I want to introduce who most volleyball people know who this is, Anne-Marie Anderson. She speaks at the AVCA convention almost every year. She's an Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, keynote speaker, and MC, 3 decades of sports broadcast experience, NBA stuff, Las Vegas Aces, voice of the Las Vegas Aces. I met her when she was with the Mountain Network doing the Mountain West Tournament back many years ago when that existed. And she is a volleyball player, a real volleyball player. She played at Hofstra, started for 4 years for the legendary Fran Califer, and was actually conference MVP in 1988. And then she also recently is now teaching workshops for aspiring broadcasters. And in fact, one of my players, Ruby Kaiser, was in one of her workshops. So Anne-Marie Anderson.
Hi, thank you, Tom. That's right. Ruby was a great student, so I love that.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know that about the conference MVP, but for your next guest, they'll be like, oh, in the 1900s.
And Jim, why don't you go ahead and introduce our second guest?
For sure. Emily Ehman is our second guest. And, I've never met Emily, but I feel like I have, because it seems like every time I turn on any sort of volleyball match, whether it be a Big Ten match or international match from last summer, Emily was there. So she's putting in some serious miles and some serious time into promoting our sport and providing her expertise. What I didn't know about Emily is that she was a Northwestern grad, played volleyball at Northwestern, and graduated from the School of Journalism there. I did not know that her uncle was Dan Dockich, and I'm an Indiana basketball fan, and Dan played for them back in the day, and now he's pretty big time in sports journalism. So, Emily, I guess on behalf of the Master Coaches, we're glad you're here, and we all appreciate the efforts that you and Anne-Marie give to our sport and the time that you put in. So I'm looking forward to firing away questions at you guys and picking your brain for your expertise. So welcome to both of you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I feel like this is a room that I am blessed to be a part of. So it's fun being talking to some legends here. Thanks for having me.
Well, Emily, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to start the questions off with one for Anne-Marie and Emily. Just, feel free to jump in there at any time. The first thing, Anne-Marie, to kick things off, how can someone break into the profession of volleyball broadcasting?
So Emily and I have something in common in that we both studied journalism in college. It's not necessary, but I think it does help. Saying that, there's a lot of people who post-collegiate, post-playing career, they want to break into volleyball broadcasting. And the first thing I'll say, and I know Emily's right with me on this, is do the work. It's all about the preparation. I think people watch games and they think, oh, that's easy, and you can talk about it. And you can tell when people don't do the preparation, because Emily and I work a lot together. She's one of my absolute favorite partners. And we have a dance. We know when the other one is supposed to talk. We know when we share stories ahead of time who's going to take what. So I think that you're going to be able to reach people and follow them, ask to shadow them. Broadcasters, I let people shadow me all the time. As Tom mentioned, I do teach a course that helps a lot as well. But do the work early and watch as much volleyball as you can.
Emily, you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would say, well, one, Anne-Marie is also one of my favorite people to work with. I think a big part of it too is, as an analyst, it's really nice for me when I have a play-by-play that played volleyball. It's really helpful. They know how to tee me up on things. They know what I'm looking for. So it's definitely, if you want to break into the industry, not just thinking that you have to put yourself in the box of being an analyst. Of course, it definitely helps when you know the sport and you're talking about the sport that you've played or studied for so long. But I would say the number one way to break in is, like Anne Marie said, doing the work and then talking to people who are in the industry and getting practice. So whether that's, talent like me or Anne Marie, or producers, whether it's at, ESPN, Big Ten Network, just to get a feel of what it's really like to do one of these broadcasts, what it takes, how to prep for a game. I think that's one of the number one things that people don't know how to do. And like Anne Marie said, you can tell when people haven't done the prep work or maybe don't know as much as a viewer or you think that they should know.
All right, my next question really for both of you. So Emily, why don't you answer it first, and Anne Marie, you can anchor the question for us. Just share, the matches or events that you both are going to be involved with, going into this NCAA championship and the AVCA convention.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I got a call about a month ago. I'm on some regional games. So if Wisconsin makes it through, I'll be up in Madison for that regional, which, for me, having a lot of Big Ten teams this year could be helpful when we potentially see a Penn State in there, Purdue, Oregon, who I've had over the last year or so as well. So yeah, I'll be one of 4 crews doing regionals up there. This weekend, I have a football event I have to go to. And normally for these first round matches, they kind of leave it up to the schools to, put broadcasters on. But I'm really, really excited to be doing regionals this year.
And I'll be watching Emily's regional, of course. And then, as Tom mentioned, this is my 8th year hosting the banquets at the AVCA, and I'll be teaching there as well. So I'll do the All-America banquet, the Coach of the Year banquet, and I will be teaching a workshop this year. It's for coaches, maximizing media, using the media to get your story across and produce great sound bites and be able to really use the media in a positive way, because a lot of times I know people aren't reaching out to coaches to prepare, and it all goes back to the preparation.
Now, Anne Marie, this question actually is for both of you guys. Are there any innovative things happening now in the way a television match is broadcast? New ideas or things that get the audience more engaged, especially a layman audience that might not understand the game? Yeah,
there's quite a bit. And, I think that our producers and directors in volleyball are catching up a bit. Now you've got producers and directors who really know the game well. And so we're not always getting just the attack, right? We're getting the libero and such. And now you're seeing a lot more of a spot shadow, a follow, a telestrator, which we used to use, Tom, when I did your games back in 2005. So telestrators and such. Jump counts is something that I enjoy a lot, and I'll pass it off to Emily after this. But when you can see a player's jump now, and then in the third set, are they jumping even higher then? Have they lost a lot of height? I like any kind of statistics like that, and more schools are using them.
Yeah, I think just in terms of being innovative, I agree. I think especially when we talk about the open. So the open being that like 2-minute segment before the game starts where you're breaking down maybe 2 of the top players or what a team does really effectively. I think the opens have been a lot more innovative and interactive and engaging than they have been in the past. We've seen spotlights on players, whether, we're specifically talking about a creative route they run or, how they come into the back row and the front row. We're getting a lot more innovative in that sense. I also think during game broadcasts, we're having, I don't want to say more fun with it, but similar to what we do in football or basketball, where, we'll hand out like, for example, last week we did my picks for the end of the season awards. I think it's engaging to a viewer when you can hear from some of the talent, whether it's me or maybe even my play-by-play, giving insight into league-wide things and getting that conversation going kind of beyond just the game that you're watching, because it brings those viewers in and makes them think about something just a little bit more.
And one other thing, Emily and I are both pushing for this. We really want some more social media interaction, because we love it when people tweet questions to us. And so we're pushing networks, hey, can you put those questions up so we can answer them so that more people then will send us questions? We both love that.
Yeah. You mentioned something that I think is really important and that's that the producers or the directors or whatever you call them, the people behind the scenes who are running the camera picks, are understanding the game a little bit more. And I'm assuming they know what types of things to bank for a replay and that kind of thing.
There's a couple ways we do that. First of all, they are getting better. And so when we say we want a shot from the end line, from the baseline, they understand more that we're trying to watch the defense form. When we say to them, hey, we want the libero and such, we want the dig, just the dig. You don't have to play it all the way through. But Tom, also for replays and such, we have a button that we can talk back to the truck without anybody else hearing us. And we will simply say, mark that, mark that, mark that. If you're trying to get a package about something specific. So we can call and help them along with that.
Yeah. And also to add on to that, even before the game, I try to put a producer hat on, and I will pretty much always send my producer and director a list of like graphic ideas that I want. So if I notice that a player over the last 10 games has doubled their efficiency or has done really well in a certain place, I can tell my producers that early on and have them watch that or look for that during the game, to where they know whether to build a package on or to build a stat graphic on or things like that. And as Anne-Marie said, I'm constantly hitting that talk back button. As an analyst, my job is to talk about the replays. So I want to get a replay that I want to talk about. If there's a crazy dig happening earlier in the rally that maybe I don't think my producer would highlight rather than the kill, which is what we see most of the time, I'm constantly hitting talk back and saying, hey, give me that dig. Hey, give me that serve to overpass kill, or give me that kill from the pass, things like that, to where I know that I can also help out my producer in that sense of what I want to talk about. Because at the end of the day, they can give me a replay, but it might not be the part of the play that I thought was most important.
I'm going to jump in here. Actually, with a question to both of you, and Anne-Marie, maybe you can go first with your response. But you both mentioned very similar things in terms of the importance of prep and the hard work that's necessary to produce a quality broadcast. Do you have a system or a format or things that you want to make sure that you do in advance of a match, so you feel comfortable once the match started that you're ready to go and good things are going to happen inside of your broadcast? So Anne-Marie, if you can go first, I'd be interested in your response.
For sure. As I said, what I teach is that there's 5 things you need to do before you ever get to the coach. As soon as I get an assignment, I search for any news stories about it. I make contact with the SID, asking them if they have a clip file. Certainly the websites have a lot that you can use as well through the bios. Look for film on the teams, connect with the sports information director, make sure you're asking, hey, have you noticed coach working on anything during practice? There's a lot that we do before we ever get to a coach, and then we put together a board, and then, only then, do I get on the call with the coach, with the analyst, and start filling that in.
Yeah, to add on to that, I agree. I think a lot of aspiring commentators, or maybe even people currently in the business, will want to fill out their boards or their notes based on the conversation with the coaches. I'm with Anne-Marie in that all my work is already done. I've already scouted the team. I have all my rosters in, height, hometown, stats that they have, what they did the last game, maybe jumps they've taken from the beginning of the season. Then I go into Volleymetrics and I'll watch, 50 swings from each hitter to see their tendencies in system, out of system, what kind of serve they have. Are they jump top spinning, or do all their serves go from, right back to right back? Things like that, to where I've already scouted all these teams. I have what they did last season. I've got their accolades in there. I've obviously got their numbers. If it's a team I'm not as familiar with, sometimes I'll also put a roster picture just to help me identify them right away. I also will always go back and watch the last game that both of those teams had to see, obviously, how they started, how they finished, what rotations they're in. So a lot of the work that I do is really watching film, and then that background research Anne-Marie mentioned as, news stories that have come up, what the team's doing on social media. Normally I'll go through all the starters and, click on their Instagram or Twitter just to see if there's anything notable at all from the last even week or so, maybe month. And then you talk to the coaches, and then you get to ask, what's impressed you most from this player who's a freshman and has stepped up so big, or what did you see from your team last weekend in that loss? What'd you tell them after the game? Or, little things like that, to where you've already done the work on the team and you know them really well, that's when you talk to the coach, because you can ask more insightful questions rather than, like Anne-Marie mentioned, tell me about your team. Tell me about your starters. Those aren't questions that any coach wants to hear, because that tells the coach that you haven't already done your prep and research, and you're probably not prepared for that call anyway.
So I guess it's fair to say that you don't just show up on the court and wing it.
No, but some people think you do.
Yeah.
Well, you do, and they get it out pretty quickly.
And I will say, your prep changes throughout the year. For example, I've had Nebraska like 8 times this season already. So I'm not doing the same prep game 1 that I'm doing game 8. I already have all that background knowledge. From there, if I've already had a team before, I just have to update some stats, maybe hitter tendencies that they did during that last game. And then, of course, watching that game. So the prep does cut down when you've had teams before. It's really helpful. But also there's so many more things you can dive into with teams you've already had, because you have that background knowledge, having covered them so many times already.
Emily, I want to follow up a little bit on a different topic, but I know the Big Ten, especially during COVID, they did a lot of matches from in studio.
Yeah.
And it doesn't happen as much anymore, at least that I'm aware of. But and I assume you did some of those matches in studio?
Yeah, it's crazy different. My first match was on site, but it was at Devaney. It was Nebraska, Maryland during the COVID year. And so there was no fans there. It still felt so much different than being in one of those pods in Chicago calling games, because you don't have a feel of, what the team's doing. You only really have the camera angles that you see on TV. It's crazy different. My first season, I think I had 7 games. It was the fall of 2021. I think 6 of those were from the studio in Chicago. So, I didn't really even know what it was like to be at a game calling it with fans in the stands, really until last season. So it's much different, because you can't pick up on a lot of things that you would in person. For example, what a team's doing in a timeout, like who's leading the timeout. Sometimes you can even hear what coaches or the players are telling each other. There's a lot of things that you pick up being on site, of course, along with the crowd reactions. It's hard to feel like you're there and, let the moment breathe if you're not there to feel it out. So there was a lot of times calling games early on where I didn't necessarily know how to react to things, because I couldn't feel how big it was. And now being on site in these big games, you automatically know whether, to let a 3 count happen before you jump in because the crowd's going crazy. Whereas you don't have that when you're in a little booth in Chicago with no windows.
Yeah, building on what Emily said, Jim, the other issue, and Emily kind of said it a little bit at the timeout, is I'm looking at all kinds of different things during the match. I might be seeing somebody who's about to come in as a sub, right? So I see that. So I can tell the producer, hey, she's about to sub in, or somebody who's getting worked on the sideline. You can ask for certain shots. So while we still only talk about what you see on the screen, we can help direct to other things that are happening in the arena that make the broadcast a better experience for the viewer.
Oh, fair enough.
What do you guys see as the biggest challenges to someone who's coming in as green, as a newbie in this? What is the biggest challenges for them?
Emily, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think getting the cadence down can be pretty difficult at times. And to be fair, even now when you're working with a new play-by-play, you have to over communicate about that stuff. Every time I work with a new person, I'll go into it and say, hey, I just want to get our communication, right away. Like once you're done talking, I'm going to come in right away. If there's a replay, I'm always going to take it. I would, love if you laid out. Most play-by-plays know that. But I think one of the most difficult things is just getting that timing down. Volleyball is so difficult to call as an analyst, because you have about 10, 12 seconds to where you're really supposed to be talking, which is the end of the point to when the next point begins. That other work is for your play-by-play to do. You don't want to talk over a point, because you could be missing something massive, a huge call that your play-by-play should be on. Meanwhile, you're still talking about the last point that happened. So for me, it was really difficult at first being clear and concise in my analysis, fitting it into that maybe 15-second window that I had. Where in other sports, it's pretty different. You're calling a football game, you got 30 seconds to break down the play that just happened at times. You have a lot of time to really dissect things. I have to know right away what happened during that play, how it unfolded, and maybe if I have time, what the effect is or what the other team needs to do to adjust. that's something that, I'm still learning in my first few years, but it's helpful when you can get that down quickly, of being as concise as possible, trying to fit into that 15-second window.
And I think, Tom, people don't know. New people in the business don't know, right, what the role is. There's a very different role for play-by-play and analyst. An analyst is how and why. So it really makes me crazy, if I'm calling a game and I say, and a thunderous cross-court hammer from Franklin, and then the replay comes and the analyst is looking at it and says, and she gets the cross-court kill. Because you don't need to say that. I've already said that. What I want to know is how and why. Was the block inside? Was there a seam? Did they go off hands? What allowed them to get that kill? Was the defender in the wrong spot? So I think that's kind of part of the trick, is nobody tells them, here's what's happening, and this is the play-by-play. And then when the analyst gets it, how and why? Educate the viewer. Emily's excellent at it. And some people just don't know what the role is, and so they just repeat the play-by-play said.
Which would you rather be, play-by-play or analyst?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, play-by-play. Well, I started as an analyst. My first match was at Nebraska, but I wanted to work year-round. And so I also call men's and women's collegiate basketball, pro women's basketball, beach volleyball, soccer, softball, water polo. I filled out my whole career that way. Plus, Holly McPeak lives down the street from me, and I knew she was going to retire. And do you want to listen to a former Hofstra athlete, or do you want to listen to Holly McPeak? So I made that move pretty early on.
Yeah, for me, it's interesting because now that there's so many options available for analysts, even it's crazy thinking back to when I started doing this 2-3 years ago, there wasn't an opportunity to call it year round. Yep. Now there's opportunities as an analyst to call games year round. We have Pro Volleyball Federation starting up in the winter until the spring. I did work with Volleyball World covering VNLs last summer. It wasn't a role that you could have year round as an analyst doing volleyball. It was just in the fall for college, and you were lucky maybe to have 20 games. Now there's so many games on TV, and it's a job that I can do year round, to where I feel like I don't have to have these other jobs. For example, I've done some sideline reporting for Big Ten Network over the last few years. Now I'm at a place where I don't feel like I have to help out my income by taking on these gigs that not that I don't necessarily want to do, but I'd always way rather be doing a volleyball game.
You guys listening to what you say, I do a little bit of work in the analyst area, and I just flunked the test. Thanks a lot.
In what way?
Yeah.
In what way?
It's pretty interesting. It would have been great for me to not have had to walk into this stone cold and try to do it right away. And I got a chance to work a Big Ten game, my very first chance at all. And I think I asked Paul Sunderland if he really understood the double contact. And that's the last time I got called to work a game. So I thought it was the banter that was fun, but not on TV, I guess. So I just have a comment for both of you. I don't know if you agree or not, but I just thought this whole season, every week, there was something phenomenal going on. It had to be fun working this fall, especially if you got part of these matches, because there wasn't a weekend when anything went the way it was supposed to go. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, Mick, I think last year we all knew Texas was the one to beat from the go, from jump. We knew it was Texas. They were number one all year. I still don't know who's going to win the national championship. There's maybe 8 teams who have a viable chance at winning, and that's been thrilling this year.
Oh, it's been so fun, not only just with the teams and the parity that we've seen, just in terms of attendance records and viewership records being shattered, more games on than ever before. There's never been a better time to be a part of the sport. And now that it's at this place too, we're also seeing upsets every weekend. It's funny. I do like matches to watch every week. Normally over the last few years, there's been weeks where I'm like, oh, we got some stinkers. These games are not going to be good. There's been exciting games every week, and the results when you're looking back on Monday, or if you're watching through the weekend, have been crazy. We've seen so many upsets that we maybe never would have seen in the past, of top teams getting swept, or these upsets that you never would have dreamed of. But also that's what makes, the postseason so fun for other sports is you see those upsets happen. I think this is going to be one of those same years comparative to other sports where we're seeing more upsets than ever before.
Agreed.
So I'm old enough that I went through when John Madden quit coaching and started to do television. And what he did is he trained people how to look at football. And so football was exposed because he'd use his little teleprompter or whatever it was. And he would draw a line where the guard should have pulled and gone here or done this or that. And it started teaching people how to not only look at football, but to actually coach football. I mean, everybody tuned in because they wanted to be part of that. One of the things that doesn't seem to happen very much is people don't talk about why there are runs of points. For instance, let's say a really good server gets matched up with somebody that doesn't pass down the line well, and they go 1-5, and they're really targeting those people. And the next game, the smart coach comes out and rotates 1 or 2 rotations just to get that server off of that person. Matchups are also important on hitters, who blocks what hitter and that sort of thing. And you don't hear much talk about that. Now, that's from basically a coach talking about this, but it was highlighted. I went to a Texas match last week, and Jesse Seltzer, who you may know worked for Texas for a while and Stanford earlier, came by and thanked me for talking about matchups on a match that I was being the analyst on that previous weekend. And it just made me think about maybe we should be doing a little bit more of that. How do you react to that?
I think that's a super fair point. And it's something that, for example, I'll always ask a coach either in serve and pass or during meetings, like, hey, what are some matchups that you're looking to either avoid or matchups that you're looking to put people on? Like, do you want this blocker in this row? Like, for example, do you want Anna Smrek and Harper Murray? That was something I asked Kelly Sheffield, and, he's like, absolutely. So there are certain matchups that I think we talk about early on, and then sometimes they don't get brought back in later as the match goes. Now, I think a good analyst or an analyst maybe with that coaching mind might pick up right away whether they've rotated. I think it's also, as an analyst, I assume that 50% of my audience has absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. And I assume 50% of my audience is a volleyball guru and they absolutely know. So you run that fine line of how can I talk about this in a way to where I'm not talking down to the people that don't know what I'm talking about, and I'm doing it in a smart way, but I'm also explaining it for those people that really do know it well in a clear, concise way to where it clicks right away. And I think it's a challenging thing that I think a lot of analysts deal with, along with the time constraints of, okay, how do I fit this into 15 seconds in an informative way that, again, is getting my point across, but not having to explain what rows mean and in all of that. So I agree with you. I think it's something we could do a better job of. One, that's analysts picking it up, and 2, delivering that in a concise, informative, not dumbing it down kind of way.
Yeah. And I think it depends on your audience too. Emily and I spent last summer traveling the world for Volleyball World, and that audience knows the game very, very well. So, when I say looks like they spun the dial to start this, they know what we're talking about. ESPN really stresses you've got to take in both parts, as Emily said. So, Mick, sometimes we see things and we have to make a decision to not lose the audience. Athletes Unlimited, they kept asking us to back it up a little bit more and not get so technical. So a lot of that comes from the composition of the audience.
Interesting. You mentioned earlier that you wanted to get more social media involved and maybe some interaction during the matches. I'm famous for texting you guys during a match. My recent one was texting Anne-Marie about what a 5-2 was, wondering if they're playing 7 against 6. Now, I was being facetious, but I really felt like it was being maybe misused a little bit. Is that something that you guys are open to, or do you not like that when people do that?
Well, I expect to hear from you, Mick, whenever I'm calling a match. And as you know, I knew what you were talking about. Others didn't necessarily on that particular point. But for that one, Mick, the coach is calling it a 5-2. There's different iterations of it. We've had this discussion. But it doesn't bother me at all. I love hearing from people, but I want it to be more than just you and coaches and people who know. I want to see those questions from social media, people who I think it just really drives engagement. Many years ago, I did Facebook Lives with Holly McPeak. And by the end of that, we reached 1 million people, had 100,000 views and 600 questions in half an hour. People love it when they can hear their name. They love it. So that's why I want more interaction that way.
Yeah, I like it too. And depending on how much is happening in the game and what's happening during timeouts and, set breaks and all of that, sometimes I'll scroll through Twitter and see if people are asking questions. Something for me too that I know is mostly just kind of personal to me, but my grandpa watches every single game I do. He's no volleyball guru, but it's nice because he'll actually text me questions throughout the match of maybe it's a term that I say where he's like, hey, can you explain that? Or he'll say, hey, I've noticed XYZ, like, why is that happening? And I know if he's asking it, who's someone who, watches a lot of volleyball, but he obviously has, no idea whether it's, what anything means. It's helpful for me because I know if he's asking that question, then probably 50% of my audience is asking the same thing. So I love getting texts from my grandpa during games of what to explain and how to break it down a little bit better.
You get a lot more from your grandpa than I got from my mom, because my mom is rooting for Colorado State, Tom, all the time. She lives in Colorado. Or she'll say things like, wow, those Southern California girls are really tall. So I don't get the help that you get in terms of what the audience. My mother just random things.
There's been things my grandpa's picked up on that maybe I haven't. Like, if someone's getting kind of served off the court, which normally I can pick up easily, but I don't remember. There was one game where someone was getting picked apart on serve receive, and I just hadn't mentioned it yet. And my grandpa sent me a text, and he was like, man, this XYZ player is really getting really struggling. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to talk about that. What am I doing? And it helps me.
Well, Bob, you better jump in there. I've taken too much time.
No, it's okay. I do have a question about broadcasting that, I wonder, I'm listening to both of you talk about different things, and I'm just amazed how I had no idea how difficult this was. I just knew that I wouldn't be able to do it. It's a lot of work. But how do you handle the time it takes to when they are trying to resolve these challenges?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It depends. I mean, we want them to be faster for sure. And that's one of the things. So I mentioned my 35th year in sports broadcasting in 2024, and there's so much that has changed over that. And with the introduction of challenges, I feel like it just stops the game when they're too long, and it can really deaden things out. I don't like guessing whether it's going to be overturned or not. I'll usually hand that to Emily or whoever is my analyst, mostly because I'm always wrong.
I love doing it.
Yeah. So Emily, you talk about it. I don't love it.
Yeah, I agree. The time is way too long. And honestly, and I've talked to people about this, and this is way above my pay grade, but I honestly think we need to set a timer on them. Like, if you don't see something within 90 seconds, what else are you looking at? Like, if you don't see something, you don't see something. I think it stops the game. We've had like 5-minute challenges this year, and it's terrible for a viewer. You're going to turn the channel, or you're going to go do something else. You're not going to stay on and watch, was a finger bending backwards, or was there change of direction on the ball? It's really frustrating, obviously, as a broadcaster, but even more so as a viewer to sit through that. And as a player, I mean, you're just trying to stay warm. Like, that's why all those girls are dancing on the sidelines, or, just jumping up and down, because they got to keep their legs warm. I don't know if there's any way to resolve that other than getting better cameras, which are wildly expensive. And I know that's, might have to be an NCAA wide thing, because then there might be advantages at other schools, XYZ. So I get that. But I honestly think we just need to set a timer on it. And if you don't see something within that amount of time, then call stands.
That's good.
Well, Emily, maybe you can start with this one, and Anne-Marie can follow up afterwards. The Big Ten. My wife watches the Big Ten every single game. I mean, to the point where, hey, can't we just watch a movie? I mean, I'm watching volleyball nonstop. but it does, we'll talk, the master coaches will be talking and planning meetings and stuff, especially recently when we're trying to decide which teams are going to make it into the 64 selection. And we'll throw out the eye test. And I keep making this point to everybody, the eye test, when you're watching a broadcast, when I'm watching the Big Ten, those players look like they're playing really, really good volleyball.
Yeah.
And then I'll watch, the Southeast Conference or the ACC or another conference, and it just doesn't look quite as good, And I don't know if that's the telecast or different cameras, angles, whatever. Can you speak to that point for me?
Yeah, I think there's a few things involved in that. I think one, the Big Ten, I don't know the exact number of cameras, but having worked on some Big Ten Network broadcasts versus some either SEC or ACC games, sometimes we just have more cameras to where maybe you can see how high a player's jumping, which maybe makes you think that they might be better because they look like they're jumping higher, even though they might not be. So I think the number of cameras is a difference because you have more angles and the best angles to see certain things. For example, say you have a slash camera, which is a high camera in the back corner, and you can see a really good server block move. Sometimes there's other conferences that might not have those same cameras to where maybe you think a Big Ten team looks better or a player looks better. So I think that goes into it. I also just think in general, Big Ten teams, at least the top Big Ten teams, are on TV a little bit more. So you're just seeing them more often, and you're seeing a higher volume of those crazy good or explosive plays or good games to where you remember that more than, say, a team like Louisville, where maybe they're not on TV as often, but they're just as good of a team.
I think too, Bob, the Big Ten gets phenomenal crowds.
Yeah.
And I think that also can influence the viewer's experience greatly. So I don't think, although the Big Ten is great volleyball, I think other conferences have great volleyball as well. But when you're watching a game and you see the stands packed and the announcers are taking in that energy and putting it back, I think that also influences it. There's great volleyball all over the country. But maybe your wife is screaming as she's watching the Big Ten, and that's influencing you along with the crowd.
Well, also just the arenas. I think, some arenas are better set up for cameras. For example, Devaney, they set up their specific cameras to highlight everything the best that they can. Same with the Fieldhouse up in Madison. There's some arenas across the country at these high level programs, take a Louisville when they're not playing in the Yum Center, or a Georgia Tech, playing in arenas where it's really hard to showcase what exactly is happening based on those camera angles. Whereas some of these Big Ten arenas are set up specifically for that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was going to say that at some point that we need to try to get out of the 2,000 seat arenas and start getting into the bigger facilities. Yeah. My question is this, and this is sort of a big question. You have you guys who are working at the game at the broadcaster level, then you have producers, then you have network executives. Do these people, these higher ups who are making decisions about what games are going on, who's going to cover them, do they understand what's happening in volleyball in the United States right now? Do they know that Nebraska, Wisconsin got 600,000 plus people viewing it? Do those network executives realize that volleyball is the number one sport for women's team sport in the country?
You may have seen the jump with ESPN recently, games getting elevated. And that's due because a new person took it over, Erica Galbraith, Lori Mancini, Jody Dank. They know the game well. They've been volleyball junkies forever. Sue Marriott from the Big Ten has been working volleyball forever. And so they absolutely know the game. And I think that's a huge part of why you're seeing these numbers go up, is they really know, they really watch. And in the case of ESPN, the way that they care about the game, because they hired volleyball people, has changed the experience for the fans.
Yeah, I think those executive producers, I honestly think Sue Marriott at Big Ten Network, she's a coordinating producer, is probably one of the number one reasons why volleyball has exploded in terms of TV. She's been covering the sport forever. The jump that you've seen from Big Ten Network, over doubling the amount of games in the last 5 or so years, is solely because of her. I think people are starting to notice. And like Anne-Marie said, Erica Galbraith has done a phenomenal job at ESPN. She knows the game so well. It is her focus, and she's putting a lot of time and effort into it. And I think where we're seeing other networks jump on, for example, ABC picking up the national championship, that's because of people like Erica Galbraith, because she's pushing them to get elevated on higher platforms, and because they've also seen the return on investment of viewership come in, which is very important, and putting a game on Fox. That's a big push from someone like Sue Marriott, who has established volleyball in the Big Ten as one of the most viewed sports. It's football, it's men's basketball, and then volleyball is right behind. They're seeing the viewership that's coming. They're seeing viewership, break viewership records every single year now. We've seen games outperform football on multiple occasions just this season alone. So I think, for example, a network like Fox coming in to pick up 2 games this year wasn't just coincidence. It's because the people in charge know the sport so well, and they've been building it up to where these other executives at networks that are maybe, those national networks, the ABC, CBS, Fox, those kind of networks are now taking notice, and they want to jump on the bandwagon because they want the viewership.
Yeah, it's a different experience now than it was, Tom, because we have these people. The 92,000 at Nebraska, that's Sue Marriott, who made that whole show run. And it changes everything when we have this kind of leadership. And we haven't had it. Sue's been there, but we haven't had it at ESPN. By the way, both Sue Marriott and Erica Galbraith grew up in Nebraska, so they grew up around volleyball intense fans. And so as a result, they really love and know the sport.
Well, it would be interesting to me to figure out how this can get communicated from those network executives back to athletic directors. Because even at Colorado State, where we have had great attendance, I've heard athletic directors say something like, well, that's Nebraska. Of course, they're going to do it. It's Nebraska. But it's happening all over the place. It's not just happening in Nebraska. And we got to figure out a way to communicate that to athletic directors across the country.
Give me his number, Tom. I'll call him.
Good. That's good.
I'm sorry. I've got one more. I've got another question here that's on, and this is an interesting. What are your thoughts on the challenges now that are faced by the Pac-12 and the conference realignment, and what's going to happen with volleyball because of the Pac-12 sort of collapsing?
It's very sad for me because when I had my 3rd child, I couldn't travel that much anymore. So I went to the Pac-12. It happened to be the year they started. And it's awful, the demise of it. I think it's going to change things in terms of travel time. I really don't like the travel that's going to happen for, Stanford and Cal with the ACC, and certainly Washington, Oregon, UCLA, and USC with the Big Ten. So I don't know what's going to happen to these teams, but I think it's a real disadvantage when you're playing in a conference that's so far from your home.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think just, we can talk so much about, the Big Ten talks about this a lot, like how great it is that Oregon and Washington, USC, UCLA are coming in with all the history behind those schools and stuff. But then at the end of the day, you think about the human aspect, and you think about those players who probably committed to those schools to potentially stay close to home and to have their parents come to games and to not have to travel to New Brunswick in a 6-hour flight for the weekend. It's really difficult for those players to have that travel schedule at these really elite schools that they're coming from too, flying 4 hours on a plane on a Wednesday night to go play in Madison, Wisconsin. It sounds really difficult as a player. And I don't think it's crazy to think that that's, why we're seeing a lot of transfers happening. It hasn't necessarily happened too much in volleyball, but, we saw, for example, a bunch of softball players decommit because they didn't want to play in the Big Ten, or they don't want to play in the ACC. They want to play on the West Coast.
I'm going to take I've got 3 questions, but I'll kind of morph them into 2. And we'll take a little bit of an off ramp away from broadcasting and thrive on controversy here.
Let's do it.
I was listening to a national volleyball broadcast involving neither of you two. So, but the comment was made, which I thought was interesting. And they were talking about, seeding teams and who are going to be the top 4 seeds and, that whole train of conversation. And the comment was made, unless, a team is drawing numbers, like home match numbers, should that compromise their ability to host? And that doesn't mean a bad team hosts in front of a good team. But if you're looking at 2 teams, for example, a 4 and a 5 seed, and 4 doesn't draw too many people and 5 is selling out, should the committee flip those 2 seeds just based on, hey, we want to have a lot of people enjoying the national tournament experience rather than just family and friends at this other place? Any comments regarding that comment in terms of should the atmosphere of the home match or the hosting team be a tiebreaker between 2 teams that are close in the seeding process?
I sure as heck hope not, because the athletes are the ones who are doing the work. The coach is the one doing the work. I heard that comment and I disagree wholeheartedly. Don't punish the athletes who have been doing the work because the fan base isn't showing up. Just work on the fan base.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think the selection committee would say they never take that into consideration. Again, I have no idea what happens actually behind closed doors, but I would really hope that that's never taken into consideration. I think there's always, when you're comparing resumes, whether it's RPI or top 50 wins or big wins or bad losses, there's always something that can outweigh something else. And attendance should never be factored in. And to be fair, they say it's never factored in. I don't know what goes on behind closed doors again, but there's always ways to justify one team over another team.
How does it hurt the athlete though?
How does it hurt the athlete? If they've done the work and they're not hosting because they don't have a great fan base there, I mean, hosting is a big advantage. And I think that's how it hurts the athlete.
Well, but I know athletes. I interviewed an athlete just 2 weeks ago that said she was so excited that they were going to go play at Texas because she wanted to play in that environment.
Sure. It's a great
I mean,
environment to play
I
in.
think
Would you rather
athletes-
play at home?
I think athletes relish the fact to get into those environments where it's just electric and they play hard. I know that we didn't way back when I used to play, we got a chance to play in front of people and it was electric. We didn't care where it was. We wanted to go play. I don't know how Jim, Tom, Bob, you guys had the same experiences, different decades, but did you feel the same way, or did you feel like you always wanted to play at home?
Well, I know this. When we made the Sweet 16 6 times, 5 of them we hosted. So
Yeah. I mean, a real life example right now is looking at Florida getting the 16 seed over Georgia Tech. Now Georgia Tech has the opportunity to play at Florida. I personally think Georgia Tech is going to handle them pretty easily because they're probably not too happy about not playing at home right now.
Louisville and Pitt too, right? Pitt hosting. So
Exactly.
yeah.
But I guess to your original point, aren't you rewarding Florida for having a lot of people there and penalizing Georgia Tech?
I mean, that, those aren't the decisions that went into the selection committee's mind, which, they
We don't
actually
know
had the chance to talk to the chair about it. I still don't really understand the decision. But that's not something they told us that they had factored in. And I would hope it's not something that was even a factor.
Okay, I'm going to direct my last question here to Emily, since you have Big Ten loyalties a little bit. What are your thoughts on, traditionally the Big Ten gets 7, 8, sometimes 9 teams in the tournament. This year, only 5. From your perspective, is that appropriate, or is there a possible 6 team that could have made an argument to get into the tournament?
Yeah, well, first I would say I honestly have no loyalties to anyone. I always root for.
Well, you should.
Well, it's not loyalties. Like, Big Ten Network's paying for games I do, but at this point in the tournament, I don't care who wins. I hope it's a good game. I hope they all go to 5 and I get epic matchups to call. But in terms of your question and only getting 5 teams in, no, I don't think there was another team that, based on their resume, should have been in contention. That next team maybe would have been Indiana, who came in at the next point in the RPI, but they're up to 73. A 73 team will never get in the RPI. This year, I thought it was a crime that Kansas State didn't get in, and they were high 50s, which we've seen those teams get in before in the 55 range. No, there wasn't another Big Ten team that got the wins and didn't have bad losses enough to make the tournament. Now, that doesn't mean that based on the eyeball test, maybe some of those teams wouldn't have been better than some of teams that did make it in the tournament. But at the end of the day, you have to have the resume to do it. And if you're not getting those wins, if you're having bad losses, then you don't deserve to be in.
What do you think was the issue with Minnesota, though? They jumped some people to go to number 54 to take Minnesota. Was that because the Big Ten is doing so well?
No, I mean, they were they're 40 in the RPI. They were 54 in KPI. So they measured both of those, but a 40 RPI pretty much automatically gets you in. The team also had 3 top 50 wins. They beat Oregon, who's a top 10 win. The committee really looks at those big wins and weighs those more heavily than a lot of other things. And, you look at the teams that were on the bubble. That win against Oregon was one of the better wins that any bubble team had. And the team only had 2 losses, one of those being to Maryland, who was an RPI 100+ team, Rutgers, who was a bad loss, 150+. But during those 2 games, Melanie Schaffmaster was sick. So, you can justify some of those losses based on context that they're getting from their regional advisory committees to explain a little bit further into maybe some of those big wins or some of those losses that they had.
Well, and Minnesota beat Stanford too early in the year by the hair of their chinny chin chins in 5 sets. And I think that also helped enormously for them. They can. It was a long time ago, but I think that those kind of wins certainly carry a lot of weight, as you all know.
That's the best answer we've heard.
Well, Stanford beat Minnesota this year, but they did have it last year. But they beat Oregon was the one they had in 5 sets.
Right.
Oh, sorry, you're right.
But it was at Stanford. But again, that's the win that got them in. If they don't have that Oregon win, I don't think they get in because 1, their RPI wouldn't have been high enough. 2, they didn't have another big win.
Yeah,
Tom,
you're right.
that's why that was the best answer.
Yeah. Because we argued this amongst ourselves Monday for about 30 minutes.
I mean, but then, you look at teams like Kansas State and NC State, who, to me, I thought it was ridiculous. K-State doesn't get in. You're 6-6 against top 50 teams. You beat Texas. You beat BYU twice. You have 3 bad losses, but so do some of those other teams. And just because your RPI isn't good enough, based on the eyeball test, they've already shown they can beat some of these top 10 teams. Then you look at NC State. What's the point of getting a win against Louisville, a top 5 team, if that doesn't get you into the tournament when you also have the resume comparative to other teams
And a good RPI.
like an SFA or like a South Alabama, and you don't get in over them, even though you beat a top 5 team? Like, I don't know.
So
I think the Big Ten used to be, along with the Pac-12 at the time, the marker. And now we are seeing, so they were getting 8 and 9 teams in. Now we're seeing the ACC just be spectacular in other conferences. And I think that's a big part of why the Big Ten didn't get as many teams, nor the Pac, of course.
It's also, I think it's just kind of people want to argue online. It was a down year for the Big Ten. Those teams that we've seen over the last few years be elite or make the tournament, like in Ohio State, like in Michigan, like in Illinois, they didn't get the wins to do it. And a lot of those teams are taking dips. So, people want to argue. I've seen coaches argue about why they didn't get in because of computer systems and the RPI. Like, you also just didn't get the wins to do it.
So one of my questions at the end of this, and we're running out of time, so I'll be very quick here. I've got 2 questions, but the first one is your thoughts about the tournament draw. And nobody's mentioned North Carolina State. You mentioned Kansas State. You mentioned, but North Carolina State didn't get in. But I'm going to let you speak on this. My opinion, though, I'm going to throw to you is that the committee really stepped up and took some chances this time on some other conferences, and athletic directors pay attention to that because the amount of money they put into a sport sometimes depends on how many of the teams in their conference benefit.
Yeah.
Sunbelt got 4 teams in this tournament. They certainly deserved 3 of them, and Texas State has been on the bubble 2 years in a row and went to Nebraska 3 years ago to play. So they've been a team that's been in the hunt, and that conference was rewarded, and they have been putting more and more money into the sport of volleyball, including adding sand now as a new sport starting this year. So I thought the committee really took a stand saying that if you're a good team, we're going to consider you for the tournament. What's your guys' take from doing all the matches you watched this fall?
Well, I think first,
go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, I was going to say, first of all, I agree. It was really cool to see the Sun Belt get so many teams in. I think 4 was a little bit generous. I think those 3 teams should have absolutely been in. Texas State has done incredible things this year, and you have to reward teams for the schedule that they make, getting those wins and not taking losses at the end of the day. Like, you did your job, you should make it to the tournament. Now, again, you look at a team like South Alabama, no big wins. The only kind of big wins they had, I don't know. That was the only questionable one I had getting in, but their RPI was good enough. But at the end of the day, it's been really cool to see so much parity. And for a conference that has never had an at-large bid since 2011, they get 3 this season. That's so cool to see because there are players in that conference that are exceptional. And if you watched any, especially of that conference tournament, like, it was so much fun to see.
I think it's so easy to second guess. Obviously, we all do it. It's part of our job. The tournament rankings, North Carolina State stuck out to me quite a bit. I think what we're seeing, though, is so good for volleyball that you're not just thinking about 1 or 2 conferences now. There is so much great volleyball. It really has to do, we saw a lot of freshmen on the floor this year for big programs. And I think that speaks to the talent level that's coming up through the junior level. And it's those athletes, there's so many good young athletes now that it is just feeding the nation and some of these programs that we haven't seen rise to this occasion.
Yeah.
The last question I'll throw out, and this will be a little controversial. You're welcome to dodge it if you want. But you talked about your preparation, and then you talk about an interview with the coach. And some of the coaches are masters at presenting information that they want to go on the air.
Yep.
I thought John Dunning was one of the best ever at getting the word out for whatever he needed for his team, either something about one player to build their confidence, something that he wanted the selections committee to hear. He was really good. How do you and I could mention about 4 present day that I think even better. Banikowski was very sly when he would do it. He would get his word out. What do you do? Do you have to think about what the coaches tell you and read between the lines sometimes, or do you just send it along and see if people want to read between the lines?
No, I mean, what we're talking about is manipulation. Let's just call it what it is, right? They want to manipulate the media in order to do what they want. And this is where the journalism degree comes in very handy that Emily and I both have, right? It's critical thinking. And then you're responsible for checking facts to a degree. First of all, coaches, they'll tell you things, all of you, and they'll be slightly off. Oh, we've had 17 different lineups this year. I heard that, and then I checked, and it was 13. So you're responsible for checking those things, and you have to know when you're being used. It's manipulation. No, I don't take anything at face value. And just because you're plugging somebody doesn't mean I'm going to plug them.
Yeah, I think a way for me when I think about it is, maybe a coach will tell you, oh, this player has the potential to be the greatest in the college game. Or like you said, I always check those stats, and I never believe coaches when they throw stats at me or lineups. And it's no offense to them, but I'm always going to double check that. I can't just go by their word. Otherwise it sounds bad on me. But normally what I'll do is, and I know Anne-Marie does the same, is say, oh, well, we can talk about a certain player. They've been really impressive this season because XYZ coach says blah, blah, blah. So that's on them. If they want to hype up someone or whatever, I'll let them do it, but I'm always going to credit them in that way. And again, if it's a stat or things like that, it's just, it goes out the door. I'm always double checking them because, they'll throw stuff at you that maybe is not accurate or comparative to other teams or players. If someone wants to push their player for player of the year or whatever it is, and is throwing stats at you, well, she did this, well, this player did this, that's fine. And I'll look into it, but you better be right. Cause if not, I'm probably going to talk about it on the flip side.
Yeah. Attribution's everything. By the way, I have a question for you coaches. Why don't you ever know how to pronounce anybody's name?
That's yes.
Right? I mean, we'll ask and they'll be like, oh, her name's pronounced this way. And it's dead wrong every time. You guys just call them by their first name all the time? Or not?
Yeah, because we don't get the sheet that has the phonetics pronunciation of each player down through the roster. And so we just pick a name that's easily pronounceable and we just call them that,
Or a nickname.
Yeah.
or a nickname.
I always have
Always
nicknames. Nicknames work well for me, so I don't have to have the accountability to know their real name.
And if you can't do that, you just say the hammer. The hammer really, or the badger in the middle back, or whatever. It's a little more fun that way.
Fair enough.
Than tripping over your own feet. Hey, you guys, I'm going to turn this back to Bob, but thank you so much for coming on. I know it's tough, but as coaches, we had a lot of fun with this, didn't we? And
Yes.
Stone,
Absolutely.
I want you to, Emily, I want you to look at Jim Stone's picture. You see that tree up by the side of his head? And now your end looks so much better than that tree. We've been trying to get Stone to put Christmas balls or something on that tree to decorate it a little bit. So
That's a work in
Anne Marie
progress.
has a tree out in her background there. It looks pretty good. I don't know, Jim.
Yeah, that's a gratitude tree that I have my kids put Post-it notes for what they're grateful on. So I've got a gratitude tree in mine.
I love that.
Well, again,
So my
we
list of
don't have
things
to
to
worry
do,
about
Rick.
our buzz reaction here because we've run out of time. I want to
Wonderful.
thank Anne-Marie and Emily very much for being part of the show. We really appreciate it. Like Mick said, it's been a lot of fun. It was eye-opening for me. I had no idea how much goes into the preparation for these broadcasts.
The preparation is the work. The game is the reward. We love going to the games. All the work's done by then.
Oh, game's the easy part. That's where you get to have fun and, talk about what's happening. It's the prep where you're, up till 2 a.m. the night before a game where you're like, oh my goodness. But no, game's the fun part. When you have environments like we've had this season, that's the part that makes our job fun and easy, and dealing with the incredible players and coaches that we have makes it that much better. But thank you so much for having us. This was awesome.
This was fun. Legendary coaches. This is a great way to spend the day. Love it.
All right. Well, that kind of wraps it up for today. And we look forward to having our viewers back next week. That'll give us a real chance to do a buzz reaction, because it'll pretty much be the master coaches just talking about the first weekend, the bracket in general, and covering what it looks like moving forward in the tournament.